All right, welcome everybody to build a connection culture in your workplace. I'm Azar with Healthy Horizons, and for over 30 years, we've supported international and global clients with workplace lactation programs, lactation room maintenance, breast pump rentals, parent education, support groups, and more. Today, we're discussing the Great Resignation and what employers can do to increase retention and of working parents overall. And we're joined today with Michael Stallard, speaker and author of Connection Culture, and Katie Stallard, a gifted connector, teacher, and 3-time cancer survivor. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, you two.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. And today from Healthy Horizons, we have our CEO, Sheila Janakos, MPH, IBCLC, and she'll be leading our conversation today. Hello, Sheila.
Thank you, Azar, and welcome, Michael and Katie. I'm so excited to learn more about the connection culture and your work and everything that you have to say. So I think this is going to be a good hour. So thank you. I just kind of want to start off with what's really on my mind about the Great Resignation. We're just hearing so much about that, and really what can employers do to retain employees?
Well, Sheila, I think it's helpful to just step back a second, and I want to share, what's really driving this. I think number one is demographics. We just see that there are fewer individuals in that 16 to 64 working years age bracket. So that's one of the factors. We also have lower immigration is affecting the Great Resignation. And then you have people who have, during the pandemic, stepped back. It's given them a little bit more time to reflect about their lives. Many have been working remotely, so they eliminated the commute. They have a little bit more flexibility to run errands during the day. It's reduced some stress for some and created more stress for others, especially if you have children at home who are being educated remotely. And we've also seen just that the physical workplace has been moving in an unhealthy direction for years. The Gallup organization just recently came out with a report that showed, and this is based on data from the US and Canada respondents, and they found that 57%, well, first of all, they found that negative emotions have been rising in the workplace for years. And they peaked in 2020, which is the most current information that they've released. So that's not a good trend. And just to drill down a little bit deeper, 57% of respondents in the US and Canada reported that they experienced stress during their prior day. 48% reported that they worried through the prior day. 26% reported they experienced sadness, and 22% reported they experienced anger as an emotion. So these are just not healthy trends. And I think it should be no surprise that we see the job quit numbers that the federal government have been tracking for 20 years now. The latest report showed the highest number they had ever seen, and has continued on an upward trend for several years now. So, some very alarming trends we're seeing. And we focus on workplace culture as an issue. And, the thing that we believe, based on 20 years of work in this area, is that organizations need to improve workplace culture so they have more positive emotions, so people feel more connected, which helps individuals cope with stress. Also, several benefits that we can get into in a little bit. And that's what we really focus on, is how do you cultivate a culture of connection that makes people smarter, happier, more productive, and more resilient to cope with stress.
Yep. How do you have a workplace environment where people want to be together? Especially if after working at home remotely, it's been kind of a nice break not to have to deal with so-and-so down the hall who's so difficult, or, some of the issues that we may have had with colleagues. Maybe it's been nice not to have that stress every day. But there are things that employers can do to improve how everyone is working together and make it a place that people want to come back to.
When I think about this, I just think how it seems like it's disproportionate, like that women are more affected. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I would say I won't have any research to give you, but it seems to those of us women that yes, it would historically fall on our shoulders, all the different balls that we're juggling, whether it's maintaining the home and thinking about the meals and if there are kids and pets, and in addition to all the job balls, and how things just bleed together, and it's hard to have those healthy boundaries around our work life, so that we are like, okay, the office is closed and now I'm not going to work at 7:30 or 8 or 9 or get back on my laptop after the kids go to bed. So I think it does land a lot on women's shoulders, and it's not surprising then if they're saying, you know what, I can't do this. I have to step out and prioritize my family or other things. So.
And it's painful to live a life of that's where we experience stress, anxiety, in some cases depression, even thoughts of suicide. So we see, one of the areas we focus on, and it's been interesting in our own work in recent years, we've had several clients come to us because they had problems with suicide in their culture. One of the largest school district in Utah, we started doing work with the Air Force, a couple of healthcare organizations who experience, and we know that a physician suicide is about 50% higher than the normal population. So just stress was high before the pandemic. It's even higher now. But the other factor that's contributing to it is what's been called the loneliness epidemic. And the most current research we've seen was done by Cigna, the insurance company. And this was pre-pandemic. And Sheila, they found that 61% of American adults tested out as lonely. So that, that's an alarming statistic. And the social isolation is even higher after the pandemic. And one academic research I want to point to that I think is enlightening, it's Julianne Holt-Lunstad, who's an academic researcher at Brigham Young University. And Dr. Holt-Lunstad did some research a few years ago. It's called a meta-analysis. It's a study of studies where she aggregated research from around the world and compared people who are connected versus those who were fell into three categories. They were lonely, which was based on responses to the UCLA loneliness scale, socially isolated, so they were just not around people, or they lived alone. And she found that those who were connected had a risk of early death that was 50% less than those who were disconnected. And those who were disconnected in those three areas that I mentioned, that they had a risk of early death that was comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it was a risk that was higher than the risk from well-known risk factors like obesity. So now this is correlation, not causation, but there's so much evidence that we present in our book and others have as well that shows we're hardwired to connect as human beings. When we don't have that connection in our lives, then our body views it as a threat and puts us in a state called stress response, which we can talk a little bit more about later.
I know in your book you've written about the science of human connection and why is connection such a superpower? Is that one of the solutions to this great resignation and making a happier workplace?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We like to.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So we like to, when we present and in workshops we teach and in our book and other materials, there's so much research that shows connection is, as Matthew Lieberman, a neuroscientist at UCLA says, it's a superpower because it makes us smarter, happier, and more productive. And it also makes us more resilient to cope with stress. So, which is especially relevant right now, I think, especially for working parents, that's a huge issue. And disconnection, we see that as a super stressor. just the effects of, and Katie can actually take us through an exercise.
But not now.
Not now, but
Not now?
at some
Okay,
point
later.
here, what
Yep.
we call the Atlas exercise.
Surprise.
That helps people kind of put this in perspective and think about, because you can't just look at connection or stress and isolation. It's a system that affects our body, and it's the number of stressors we have and the extent of the stressors, how much connection we have, or supportive relationships, and also resilience factors. So we have a way to just help people kind of think about that and how it applies to their own lives. But it's a huge issue right now. I think what we have seen is we started seeing more interest in the importance of connection before the pandemic, but now it's gone to a whole new level because I think almost everyone has felt a sense of disconnection. And so the need for connection has become more of a felt need because of the pandemic.
Okay, so if connection is our superpower, then it's helpful to think about disconnection as a super stressor. And some of the things that happen to us when we have this disconnection, we have a lack of sufficient connection, if you will. It reduces the quality of our sleep. And it makes it tougher to have that willpower to eat healthy or to get out there and get some exercise. It makes us more vulnerable to other stressors. So the weight that you feel on your shoulders feels even heavier when you are disconnected. And there was another thing that I was going to say. Oh, you have a more intense reaction to negatives. And there's less emotional boost from the positive, the good things that are happening. And I think some of us may have had experiences where if you feel left out and lonely and you feel on the outside of things going on in your workplace, it begins to build up, and you're not going to be your best self, and you may not want to work as hard. And just that negative experience really makes it hard to give our best to things. And think about how a team is functioning if everybody is like separating and not working together and not wanting to be together and not wanting to share. So this connection is something, well, it sounds like it's intangible, but they're actually very tangible, practical things that employers can do to boost connection and help each other, help employees to kind of bridge those gaps. Sorry, I don't know if I'm saying anything. Very articulate.
I want to know what employers can do, because
we'll get to that. Yes,
I am so excited about this work. I just wanted to backtrack a little bit.
Yes.
How did you get into this? Like, how did you start this work on leadership and organizational culture? Like, what was this that made you join this field or work in it? It's just very fascinating.
Yes, it was a confluence of factors, Sheila. One was I worked on Wall Street in my first career, and there were times when I worked in environments that were energizing and others that were draining the life out of me, I would say. And it got me thinking, is there a best culture? Then I also saw that in mergers, oftentimes the merging or the acquiring party doesn't really connect with the organization that's being acquired. So that 4 out of 5 combinations, whether they're mergers or acquisitions, 4 out of 5 fail to connect to create economic value. Now, most people don't know that. There's research that supports that. So it's these parties who are coming together, but they don't connect. And so they don't work together. In some cases, they sabotage each other. So it got me thinking about, is there a best culture? And I decided to leave Wall Street in 2002. And it wasn't I started digging into the research and taking a sabbatical, so to speak. And then Katie was diagnosed with breast cancer and then advanced ovarian cancer. Her chances of survival at the time were less than 10%, that she would survive for longer than 5 years.
Oh my.
Our daughters were just 12 and 10 years old. So it was a stressful time. And Katie was treated at Greenwich Hospital in our town, which is part of Yale New Haven, one of our clients, and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And just seeing the connection that these healthcare organizations had, how much they love their patients and the caregivers. And there was that connection that they had with each other. It was such a contrast to what I saw on Wall Street. And I saw that in the research, that these connections, they affect our biology. They help us thrive as individuals and help the organizations thrive. So those, the combination of research, my own experience, and then that experience at Sloan Kettering and Yale New Haven really had a big impact on me in kind of connecting the dots and seeing that it was connection. It's been exciting to see in recent years more leadership thinkers, academic researchers are starting to focus on connection. I think it could eventually be seen as a whole new model for leadership and organizational culture.
It's just something that we didn't talk about before, but how interesting that you were able to see that stark contrast between the healthcare industry that Katie was, a patient in, and, Wall Street. And I'm sure that was a lot of light bulbs went off. I could just, so important that you were able to capture that and then work with that. Take something that's so scary and stressful and make it into such a positive thing. Oh, gosh.
I think for some people, and maybe this is a generational thing, but some people go into work and it's all about the tasks. Right. I've got work to do. I've got this never-ending to-do list. And they try to they have a work life and they have a personal life, a life at the office and a life outside of the office. And let's not merge the two. I think, early on in Mike's investment banking career, that was his mindset. I have work to do. I don't need to chat about my day or my weekend or my family or anything. This is work. And maybe I could say stereotypically for women, we're a little bit more about, how was your weekend? What did you do? Oh, we are a little bit more relationally minded, and we bring that with us into the workplace. So we are seeing, so for Mike, part of this aha was, no, the relationships matter so much. If the relationships are going well, then all sorts of things are going to go well. If the relationships are toxic and bad, then that's going to get everything off track. So we actually need to focus on relationships. And some people might say, well, that's the soft stuff. We're not being paid to be friends at work. Well, actually, if you are friends at work or able to be tolerant and polite with one another, things are going to go so much better. So let's start talking about connection and the relational piece of work. So,
and just Katie, what my own experience, it just is so consistent with what Katie just said. There were times I was working on some really intense mergers, and it squeezed out time for family and friends. It squeezed out time for connection. But Sheila, I didn't know I was hardwired to connect. I didn't know I needed that. I just knew that I wasn't feeling well, but I had no clue why. And this is happening to millions of people today. We see it in the data. They are struggling with anxiety, with depression, with addiction, and even at times thoughts of suicide. And also, just to mention it, when people suffer from high stress, there's a higher likelihood of them being aggressive in terms of physical or verbal or sexual violence. And research shows that when someone acts out toward another in aggressive ways, it does reduce their stress. But it's obviously not good
on the perpetrator.
Perpetrator, exactly.
It's a release, but a negative release.
It's this displacement aggression.
Right, exactly. But I started developing addictions to cope. I know I needed more caffeine in the morning. I needed to kind of break away and get a quick run in to rev me up for the afternoon. I needed more alcohol to slow me down at night. But of course, that wasn't really helping me sleep better. And so I could tell eventually the wheels were coming off the bus, and I just had to take a break and figure out what was going on in my own life, as well as I was interested in, is there a best culture? So that's another part of the story is when we run into executives we coach who are struggling with some of these issues, my my perspective in helping them is that I've been there, and I feel for them. They feel like they're blindsided. They don't know why they don't feel well, and there's no joy in their life. And it's a journey to get back to help them understand that they're hardwired to connect, and they've squeezed that out of their lives, and that's why they're struggling.
I just think it would be so comforting to hear from somebody like you that this was your journey and you didn't realize this is what was happening, and then they could relate to it because they, the same experience. And I just, it's just something that we don't talk about when we don't share. And I think, like Katie said, women maybe are a little bit different in some ways, but men are really hardwired, I think, to not have those kind of connections and relationships at work. And hopefully things are changing now. I think hopefully the younger generations are looking at life a little bit different than we are. The older generations. Are you seeing that, like any difference between the generations?
Well, I think we do see, we have a center based on our work at TCU in Texas, which is a school of about 10,000 students. And we definitely see they want to be in a workplace that's healthier. They want to see, so, in that sense, I think when I came out, that wasn't on my mind at all. It was, pretty much, what are they going to pay me? And what are my job responsibilities? And what are my future prospects? So I do find that I think the younger generations are bringing a little more holistic wisdom to their decisions about, being in a healthy workplace culture. I think they value relationships more. I do think, they're struggling with online relationships can be a struggle versus having, it's interesting that in Gallup's research, they have what they call the Q12. It's 12 questions that predict employee engagement. The most predictive is, do you have a best friend at work? Now, when you look at the research, I'll talk to a lot of executives. I'll mention that in there, like, well, you don't hold me accountable for best friends at work. And I can understand that. This is just what the data says. This is what the science says. And it's true. And it makes sense when we understand that when we have a best friend at work, we have someone that we can talk to, who is safe, who has our back. And those things make a difference. They help our bodies stay in a state of homeostasis or balance versus that stress response. And it might be worthwhile just to take a minute and go a little bit deeper in this, because this was really helpful for me and my own understanding that so when we talk about stress, we usually talk about, acute stressors versus chronic stress. So if somebody was attacking me, then my body would go into fight or flight mode, the stress response. And that's good because it'll help probably protect me, from that individual who's attacking me. That's an acute stressor. But chronic stress is what we're seeing in the workplace today, where people, they're struggling with ongoing stress, during their work hours, they're experiencing a stress level that's putting their body into stress response, which means that their body is allocating blood, glucose, and oxygen to the heart, the lungs, and the big muscles. It's over allocating to those bodily systems, and it's under allocating to the hippocampus in the brain, which is part of the memory, the digestive system, the immune system, and the reproductive system. And so if they're stuck in that state of stress response, those systems are under-resourced and they're going to start deteriorating. And people when that happens, we don't feel well. And we typically turn to substances and or behaviors that help boost our mood, but they're addictive. The healthy way to boost our mood is, there are several things that help boost the mood, but connection is one that produces serotonin in particular. When you look at positive emotions, things like connection produce serotonin. It's I think of it as a sense of contentment, where dopamine from more activities where we're looking out into the future, something we're chasing, whether it's money, power, status, or all three. It's an excitatory positive emotion that lasts for about half an hour. So it's been called the molecule of more. because you always want more, right? You always want more money, more power, more status. And it doesn't really provide this sense of satisfaction. Now, dopamine is good to an extent because it gets us moving and it motivates us.
Right.
But if our bodies become so driven by this dopaminergic system, it is not healthy. And it leads to burnout. Whereas if we have a balance of dopamine and serotonergic system that we've developed because we have strong relationships, then that helps. Our life is so much better. We're more grounded. We have that sense of contentment. People, even they sense that in our personalities, whether we're a more grounded, reliable individual, or if we're just chasing things for our own self-satisfaction.
Can you talk about the amygdala hijack? Would that be this right moment?
Yeah, well, when we feel threatened,
another biological thing,
yes,
which I think is so
there's
interesting.
all kinds of interesting,
It's fascinating. No,
yes,
go. Yeah.
fascinating aspects. Well, one is when we feel threatened, our brain can move into this state called the amygdala hijack, and we're not going to make the best decisions. So, think of it like a teeter-totter. When we feel threatened, it engages the amygdala, which is part of the brain that's about the size of a almond, and it is where threats are processed. At the same time, it quiets the prefrontal cortex, where we make rational decisions. Now, when we get involved in conversation, where we're processing our worries, perhaps with someone, then the brain shifts. It engages the prefrontal cortex and it quiets the amygdala. So the effect is we make better decisions, we're more rational, and we feel better just by the simple act of getting in, processing our worries with someone. Something that simple has that effect on the brain.
So I think about, what we see on television shows, on, law enforcement kind of shows, where there's a heightened situation and, maybe it's a hostage situation or something. And the hostage negotiator comes in and begins to try to establish as calmly as possible a conversation and get the person talking. It kind of de-escalate. Tell me about your family, or tell me about, just something. And it's getting the mind to shift out of this very reactionary back into something calmer, a little bit more rational. So anyway, it's very interesting how our mind and body work, and we may not even be aware of that. So a simple thing like talking with somebody to kind of, process your worries or your stress is important.
Yeah. That's the first thing hostage negotiators do in that situation. They get the perpetrator to talk, and it calms their nerves and it makes them more rational.
I'm going to definitely remember that.
Yes,
Okay.
we always tell people never worry alone, because
Right.
if you're worrying alone, bad things can happen from that. So
Right.
process your worries with someone else, a trusted friend who can help you think through, and it'll make you feel more comfortable and you make better decisions.
Awesome.
Sorry, I know I'm getting us off on little.
No, it's fascinating. I'm learning so much.
Yes. So.
Okay. I know that you were in your book, you were talking about like the 7 universal human needs to thrive at work, and how do they relate to connection? Is this an okay time to talk about that? Or
Sure. Yeah, we found we do a lot of work in healthcare, and we've found that a lot of physicians have never had training on, say, leadership or how to create a healthy workplace culture.
Right.
And so we've had some comment that they really like this 7 universal human needs to thrive in the workplace. And I think of it as kind of an updated version of Maslow's hierarchy as it applies to the workplace.
Okay.
And so it helps to think of it from a chronological standpoint. When you first join a group, they don't really know you. You don't know them. They haven't had a chance to see what you can do. But at a minimum, you expect them to be respectful because you're a human being. And if they are patronizing, if they're putting you down some way, or they're passive aggressive, they're intentionally ignoring you, that brings about negative emotions. And that doesn't help us be our best selves or do our best work in the workplace. As we're there longer, then we expect that we'll receive some recognition for the good work that we're doing. If we don't receive that, then we start to wonder, is anybody even seeing the hard work I'm doing and the quality of the work I'm doing? And that can bring about negative emotions that undermine our ability to be our best selves at work. And then as we're there longer, we start to develop friendships and a sense of belonging. People whose backs we have and who have our backs. It has to go both ways. And when that need for belonging is met, that also helps us thrive. We need, the next need is autonomy. We need to have some freedom to do our work. If we're subject to overly controlling boss or a boss, then we don't do our best work. As we're there, that need for autonomy needs to be coupled with personal growth, which simply means we're in a role that's a good fit with our strength. It's not over challenging so that we're stressed out. It's not under challenging so that we're bored, but it's in that sweet spot of challenge where we feel a sense of connection to our work and the hours fly by. It's been called flow or optimal experience, but it produces positive emotions, and that's good for us. It makes us feel more connected to our work. And then meaning. If our work is significant to us in some way, I always think of the doorman at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. His name is Nick Medley, and one of the first people we met at Sloan Kettering when Katie was treated there. And for Nick, he's a cancer survivor who attributes his survival to the treatment he received at Sloan Kettering, and he's a powerhouse. He's connecting with hundreds of patients a day when they meet him in the lobby at one of the Sloan Kettering buildings. So his work is meaningful to him. And then finally, we need progress. We need to see that our work is having an impact. And we can't just be just in meaningful work, but not seeing progress. And when all those needs are met, people describe it as, I feel connected to my work. I feel connected to my colleagues. I feel connected to the people I'm serving through my work. And those connections, by meeting these 7 human needs to work in the to help us thrive in the workplace, really have a profoundly positive effect on boosting positive emotions and helping us be our best selves in the workplace.
Gee, this information would be so good to have in like MBA programs too, where people are going to be leaders.
Right.
I don't think this is taught at all. We have to redo the way we teach people. I think we'll have happier people. I always think about when my kids were little and they would talk about what they wanted to do when they grew up. And I always say, I don't care what you do, as long as you're happy and you enjoy your work, that's all that matters. And I'm thinking about some of these things that you're talking about, and it kind of all fits in. Because if you're not happy at work, then nothing's going to work. Yeah.
Yeah, it spills over and affects, I saw that with my father, worked for one of the big automotive companies when we were growing up, Sheila. And I just think it was a toxic workplace, and he brought that anger home. And it was not, it affected all of us. So what you said really resonates with me.
And those were the days where you got a job and you stayed there until you retired and got your retirement watch.
Right.
Yeah. There was no jumping around or very, very different. So I'm glad we don't do that anymore.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
So what are some other things that you could share? Like what can leaders do to cultivate this culture of connection?
Well, Katie, you want to talk about the 3 types of relational cultures?
Yes. Okay. So when we talk about culture, we tell people to think about there's the task excellence side of what you're doing, but there also needs to be the relationship excellence. So it's that combination. If you're thinking about a formula, task excellence plus relationship excellence is going to get you to this sustainable, superior performance. You might be able to hit your marks and do really well for a short time if you're just like task, but if you don't have that relationship piece, it's not going to be sustainable. So and we kind of focus on the relationship excellence piece. If we expand it out, we have talked about how there are 3 pieces to that. And before I get to that, you had asked me about the relationship cultures. So we've identified that there are 3 types of relational cultures that people should know about. And I like to have people think about, keep that lens of of connection in mind, and those 7 universal human needs. Think about respect, recognition, belonging, autonomy, personal growth, meaning, and progress. And how is the culture you're in doing when it comes to those 7 things, and whether you feel connected or not? So first type of culture of control. And I probably don't need to say too much about that.
We all
We all kind of know, right? It's the people who have the power, the status, the influence, who are basically controlling others.
Right.
And how does it feel to be part of the others? You might feel, left out. There's this little inner circle, and you are completely competent, and you've got all sorts of good things to say, but for whatever reason, you're on the outside, and there's no way for you to get on the inside. So you might feel left out or lonely. You absolutely might feel micromanaged by your controlling boss, as well-meaning as he or she might be, and the person just doesn't see how micromanaging and disconnecting that behavior is. You might feel unsafe or just, absolutely underappreciated, undervalued. So that's culture of control. The other one is a culture of indifference. And we see this, far too often, because we've got this never-ending to-do list that I mentioned before, and people are all about the tasks, and they just don't take the time or make the time to build those healthy and supportive relationships with one another. And maybe they think, I don't have time to talk. I don't have time to do anything. Well, if you had good relationships, you actually might be able to do your work a little bit better and smoother if you had some social capital, built up. But and sometimes in these cultures of indifference, it could be the whole busyness thing, but it also might be some leaders who just, don't actually care about people, or they are under the gun so much on what they have to produce that they are pushing the people underneath them. So both of these unhealthy cultures, they can be a culture of, fear, especially the culture of control, where people are afraid to speak up, afraid to make a mistake, afraid to raise their hand and offer something because maybe they've been shot down before, or they can tell, oh, we want to hear from you. Actually, we really don't. Go ahead and say it, but our eyes are, you can tell the person doesn't really care what you have to say, even if, they gave you the opportunity to speak. So both of those types of cultures, I think people begin to kind of pull away, put your head down, do enough to get your job done, keep the paycheck coming, but you begin to check out a little bit. It's self-protective, but it's also like, they don't care about me, so why should I really give my best, care about what's going on? Okay, dragging that on a bit too long. What you really want is the culture of connection. No surprise. You want to be in a place where people are for each other, and where you feel seen and heard and valued, where everyone is like actually a marketplace of ideas, where everybody has a seat at the table, is a good thing. So jump in and say some more about the culture of connection, because I'm getting off on different tracks.
No, I think that's very helpful. Just, it gives all those benefits we talked about earlier: smarter, happier, more productive, more resilient to cope with stress. Maybe it would help just to hear a few examples.
I was going to ask that.
From our
Give me some
clients.
examples, because I want to be able to relate to this and kind of picture. Yeah.
Okay, so talk about the 3 V's for a minute before you give your examples.
Sure. So a pattern that we've seen in organizations, we've been doing this work for almost 20 years. And I remember when we first talked about connections, we used to get a lot of blank stares. But that's changed. It's interesting that it's, we're seeing more leaders who really get this, and they're intentional about cultivating it in their organizational cultures. And so the pattern that we've seen, Sheila, is that a leader who communicates a vision that inspires and unites people, who thinks and treats people as individuals rather than as mere means to an end, and who gives people a voice to share their opinions and ideas, and then considers those opinions and ideas when possible, or vision plus value plus voice to simplify it. That's what drives, that drives 95% of connection. And just to give a few examples, I think to help, bring light to this model, I think of Costco. Costco, I love, I love
know,
Costco.
Right? Can't get out
Costco
under
groupie.
$100.
Right. So dangerous.
M&Ms, and you come out with a lot of other things. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, Costco has been year after year in Fortune surveys of the best large company employers. They're in the top 5 year after year. So, what are they doing right? And as I got to know Costco, I remember asking Jim Sinegal, the co-founder, how would you describe your culture, Jim? And he said, do the right thing. And I was like, what? I was kind of probably like our dog, what? What does that mean? And he said, well, we obey the law. We take care of our members. We take care of our employees. We respect our suppliers, and we reward our shareholders in that order. And, all I can say is I hope you're a Costco shareholder, because they have been phenomenally. Wall Street has called them Amazon proof. They are just so wildly successful, and they continue to be. And, that as I've gotten to know people who work at Costco, there's a real sense of pride that the company does have a reputation and it does the right thing. It's a trustworthy organization where its members can trust that this company is looking out for their best interests. And if they say, for example, if they can't find meat processors who meet their standards, they will build their own. They have very high standards for what they purchase, and they test everything. So they're a very trustworthy organization. There's a real sense of pride about that, and how they treat their employees too. They're well known for paying attractive benefits in their industry. I should say attractive wages and benefits. Another thing that I saw as I got to know Costco was that they have an apprentice-like training program where managers are mentoring and, they're helping the people they're responsible for leading learn and grow so that they can increase their responsibilities if they desire to do so. And so that's a real benefit. It just shows they really care about their employees. And then I remember I spoke at Costco's annual managers conference one year, and I saw them show video after video of employees from literally all around the world who had come up with ideas to improve efficiency, reduce costs, improve their member service or their employee experience. And there's a real pride you can see in the employees who are sharing their ideas, knowing that it was going to be shared with the warehouse managers worldwide at their annual conference in Seattle. And so it just shows that people felt like they had a voice, that they mattered, that they wanted them to think about how do we improve what we're doing every day. And so that vision, value, and voice at Costco is very powerful. But we've also seen it in our book. We write about such a wide variety of organizations. The U.S. Navy, Oprah Winfrey is an amazing leader who totally gets connection culture. Lin-Manuel Miranda and the creative team that developed Hamilton. I think of, help me out with some others. Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, and one of the longest term leaders in Europe.
Vivek Murthy.
Vivek Murthy, the current Surgeon General. Tricia Griffith, who's CEO of Progressive. So we have just a wide variety of examples in the book of leaders who have been intentional about cultivating connection in their organizational culture. And just another thing to mention very quickly is in research we've done with organizations, we've seen that there are subcultures that are connecting in the same organization. You'll find subcultures that are connecting and subcultures that are draining the life out of people. So the challenge for leaders is to cultivate a connection culture in each subculture throughout their organization.
I could see how that would be an issue if there's connection here and then there's a subculture that's not connected.
Right.
Yes.
Well, we know how you can put all sorts of really positive things on your website, carefully crafted language. here's what we're about, here are our values. And, it's very aspirational. But as the employees, is it actual? Is that really what our culture is about? And so when you can think about, you can look at culture as, okay, well, what are the predominant attitudes? What's the language people are using? And what are the behaviors? And are they connecting? Are they drawing people together? Or are they breaking that connection? We know of a company that purposely chooses the word colleagues when they're referring to one another. So you're not going to hear the senior leaders saying, my people, my team, employees, even coworkers. It's this word of colleagues, and sometimes words really matter, because if I'm a colleague, then I feel a little bit more valued. We're side by side. Colleague feels together, whereas my team, my people feels very
separate.
Yeah, like you're a little cog in the machine.
Right.
So I think there are, if leaders, managers, want to think about connection in terms of attitudes that are being spoken, but also attitudes that are just in the air, unspoken, what are the terms being used? How can they address those? What are the behaviors going on? I think of humor. And humor can be a great thing for a team, to laugh together and have fun together. But humor can also be like, a little stabbing sword there. Sometimes that sarcastic remark brings a laugh into the room. And even the person who's the target of that might laugh. But it's absolutely breaking connection. And it's just a little stab. And if you have enough of those little stab things going on, then you begin to put the wall up, and, less trust, I'm going to be less vulnerable if I don't feel like I can trust what my colleagues are going to do with this information.
It just doesn't sound safe.
Exactly.
Yeah, this might be a good time to bring up just the ratio of positive emotions to negative emotions.
Go right ahead.
So we really like, and I imagine many people who are listening to or watching this would be familiar with John Gottman's work. He focused on the positivity ratio, and his work started out studying married couples. They actually filmed them, and then they broke down their interactions in excruciating detail and then judged each interaction. Was it something that was positive, that connected us? Was it negative, that was either indifferent to or pushed people away from each other? And what they found was that after they did this research, then they looked at who are the relationships, the people in the relationships who they called the masters, and who are the disasters. And what was the difference? I know, I love that terminology. So what was interesting is the masters had a ratio of on a day-to-day basis. The ratio was 20-1 in terms of positive to negative emotions as a result of the interactions. 20-1. Isn't that amazing? And then in further research, they would put couples into a conflict resolution situation. And they found that the masters still had a positive ratio of 5-1 in conflict situations. So you could see how they overwhelmingly focused on the positive and worked through their disagreements. Now, that research was based on marriages, not the workplace. And there has been some research on the workplace, and some of it suggests that the positivity ratio is maybe around 3-1. I'm not sure we really know. There's a lot of debate around that. But I think the point is, number one, negative things, anything that's negative in an interaction, it seems to be magnified. So that we need more positives in our interactions with others to maintain a strong, positive working relationship. And so we want to make sure that as leaders, we're intentional about cultivating a culture, and as coworkers, and in the home, I would add, and in our communities, we want to cultivate relationships that are overwhelmingly positive. Now, that sounds like it could be exhausting, but the good news is that small things matter. When do we face someone when we're talking to them? Do we maintain eye contact?
Okay, now I'm gonna have to
Are we distracted by our notifications on our cell phone?
Right.
Do we help me? What are some others?
Right. So body language, even things like smiling at someone,
using their name.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you, Mike. And when you enter a room and there are a small number of people, to go ahead and say hi, use someone's name if you can, if it makes sense, to kind of say goodbye. If you, for somebody who's really sensitive to connection, and you don't acknowledge that person, it's going to feel like indifference, and that may be the last thing that you want them to feel. So just small little things like that. We know, I mean, as a mom, when I had little people, if you would like to open the door, because you can see I've got so many things, thank you. Just to help, just what can we do to help one another and smooth the path for one another. So small things can add up. And of course, you want to be doing these positive things, not because you have to, like, oh my gosh, I've got a list. I've got to get to 20 with each person who's under me, who reports to me, and begin to do things that feel false or feel, it needs to be sincere. But I think about how way too often that one negative comment sticks to us.
Oh.
And so maybe this positivity ratio, we need 20 to 1. We need a lot more of the positives, because that one seems to have, as Mike said, magnified, has more weight than perhaps it should.
Yeah. And when you cultivate that positive, overwhelmingly positive relationship, I like to point to Barbara Fredrickson's work. I just think she is one of the great psychological researchers of our time at the University of North Carolina. And she has found that what she calls the broaden and build theory, which simply means that when we experience positive emotions, primarily from relationships, but other positive emotions as well, it has two effects. It broadens our perspective. We literally see more and perceive more in our environment. And you can imagine that gives you a huge advantage in life when you can see more and perceive more. And it also builds resilience, so that we're able to cope with challenges and inevitable obstacles that we run into. And the effect is it creates this spiraling up of performance and positive emotions. And I believe that the opposite is true too, that if the environment is overwhelmingly negative in our interactions, it creates a spiraling down. So for leaders who want to continue to move up and to the right, to use kind of financial graph language, it's essential to cultivate and overwhelmingly positive relationships, primarily based on, on positive emotions through relationships.
I think that some people, their personality is geared towards more connection and the positivity than there's other people who, how can we help those people who maybe aren't wired that way?
Well, I think that number one is, knowledge is power. I think helping them understand these things. And that's what we wrote the book for. It really was to make the case. We teach workshops on it as well. We have our LinkedIn learning course that's done very well. So knowledge is step one. And what we find, we actually have a 5-step process that helps people. Number one is the knowledge to understand, what we call developing a connection mindset. Number two is starting to put in place these attitudes, uses of language, and behavior that's connecting with others, and watch what happens. And when people understand it and they try it out and they see the effect it has, it starts to create that spiraling up, because it is life-changing for them. Oftentimes I think of a orthopedic surgeon that we were talking to, and she had a coach who helped her see that her team didn't feel that she valued them. I mean, she was a driver. She had very high expectations from a performance standpoint, but she never really took the time to connect with her team. She just assumed that they knew that she cared.
Because
but they didn't.
She did care.
She did care.
But she wasn't showing it.
Yeah.
She wasn't verbalizing it, and her actions weren't showing it. She just assumed they knew.
Yeah. So she with the coach's help, she saw the improvement the effect that it had on her team, the improvement in their performance. And she hired a full-time coach out of her own pocket. And she took some of what she was learning about improving the work culture, improving her leadership abilities, and she implemented it in the operating room. It helped her and her team drive post-surgical infections down to near zero.
Life-saving.
Yeah, literally life-saving for those
Oh,
patients. And, we see that often, that leaders who do care about people, but they just need some help becoming more intentional about connection. And it has a positive effect on their life as leaders in the workplace, but also on their lives outside of work. And I think it becomes self-reinforcing. When their lives outside of work are better, it improves their work lives and vice versa.
That makes perfect sense. I know we only have a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to, can we maybe consolidate a couple of key practices that maybe a leader can do to help boost this connection?
Okay. Goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you want to jump in? 3 minutes left.
Let's do vision, value, voice.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So one thing that we really like in terms of vision is, coming up with a pithy phrase that is memorable, that kind of captures the importance of the work that the team is doing. So I think at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, they have the best cancer care anywhere is a phrase they use, or New York Presbyterian, amazing things are happening here. Just finding something pithy that's memorable, that kind of captures the essence of why your work is having a positive effect on the world in some way. So that's a simple thing you can do. Another thing you can do is set your Google alerts to the name of your company and make sure you're sharing positive stories about your organization with your peers. That's a great way to just reinforce the vision. In terms of value, taking the time to get to know people. There's research on what's called personal knowledge. And when we get to know more about an individual's life outside of work, the research shows that it humanizes that individual for us. And in both cases, the two individuals become more responsive to each other, and they're less likely to backstab one another. So it has a positive effect on collaboration, on cooperation, when we get to know more about a person's life outside of work. So that's one I could put under the value category. And the third is voice, seeking people's opinions and ideas on a regular basis. I like the idea of, we call it knowledge flow sessions, which is a leader shares what they're thinking, what they're presently thinking, what's a relevant issue in their business or organization. And then ask the question, what's right, what's wrong, what's missing from my thinking? And just shuts up and lets people talk and, capture their ideas, write them down, follow up in writing and say, here's what I heard. Here's what I'm going to take action on. And even if I don't take action on some of the things I heard, I'm at least aware of it and I'm going to keep my eye on it. And I may take action on it later. And you would be surprised. We find in a lot of organizations, they're very motivated by the vision, but they don't interact in ways that make people feel valued or that they have a voice. And that takes away from the energy of the organizational culture. So those are just 3 quick things that I mentioned. There are so many more and some that are relevant to the pandemic, but I think we probably run out of time for that.
Mm-hmm. We have 2 minutes left. There is one question. Can you see it on the screen?
Yes. The pandemic has been stressful for most people. Is there a silver lining, maybe around resiliency and different ways to connect? Absolutely. And I think one of the things about the pandemic, when we suddenly had to be apart from one another, is that we became very aware of how much we want to be with other people.
Right.
That this idea of connection, which may have been like fuzzy and warm and why, we were like, oh, yes. So I think people are moving toward connection and they will value it more. And it will be something that we all are talking more about.
Right.
And so different ways to connect and resilience things. I think about, we've seen how important self-care is. And you've probably heard that, self-care is not selfish. If you aren't caring for yourself, you're not going to be able to be a good connector with other people. So, think about your sleep, think about what you're eating, get outside, get some sunshine, find those life-giving friendships, family member, neighbor, whoever, and spend that relational time so that, find a creative outlet. You've got to make sure that you have enough in your tank, but really that connection piece, make that a primary thing that you're thinking about, because it will help the stress not to feel so much. You'll have people to kind of process, go through life with, and just enjoy too. Did I capture some
Perfect.
things?
That
That's
sounds
the
like
end.
Not where we say, find the
Well
book,
done.
find the second edition of Connection Culture. All sorts of practical things that you can do, and all sorts of research really will give you much more than we could touch on today.
Thank you so much for joining us in these resources. So the book is one resource.
Yes.
And any other resources before we log off?
Yes, you can go to connectionculture.com. Very simple and easy to remember. You can email us, Mike@connectionculture.com, Katie@connectionculture.com.
That's with an IE.
And if you're on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can send you a link to take our Connection Culture course on LinkedIn for free. That's one of the privileges that LinkedIn Learning has given us. You have to take it within 24 hours, finish it within 24. It's only about an hour of content. Yeah. So, just reach out to us and we'd be glad to send you that link.
That sounds great.
Jane, you've asked one thing that you can implement now. Oh, and it's 3:01. So Jane, write to us and we'll think of a good thing for you to
I love it.
implement. So Mike@connectionculture.com, and then we'll answer together.
It's been a pleasure, both of you.
Okay,
Katie.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you.
Gone pretty quickly. We've just touched on things.
Yes. Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, Azar.
Okay.